I visited my grandmother unannounced on a sunny Sunday afternoon. She froze the second she opened the heavy oak door. Her eyes widened with absolute terror. She grabbed my arm, pulled me inside, and shoved me straight into the dark cedar closet in the hallway. "Hide right now," she whispered, her voice shaking in a way that made my blood run cold. I did not even have time to ask a single question before the front door clicked open again. I heard the sharp, familiar sound of my mother walking into the foyer. The cruel things my mother said to my grandmother while I stood trapped in the dark completely shattered my heart. But the secrets they revealed gave me the ultimate weapon to destroy their perfect facade. My name is Zariah, and I am 28 years old. For my entire life, I have been the designated disappointment of my deeply religious, highly critical family. While they paraded their wealth and social status at church every Sunday, I was the quiet outcast they openly mocked. They thought I was just a broke college dropout struggling to pay my electric bill. They had absolutely no clue that I was actually a certified forensic accountant working for the Internal Revenue Service. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who severely underestimated your worth and your intelligence. The air inside the narrow hallway closet was thick with the scent of dried cedar wood and old mothballs. I was crammed between my grandmother's heavy winter coats, my knees aching from crouching in the tight space. Through the narrow wooden louvers of the closet door, I had a clear view of the vintage living room. My mother, Valerie, paced back and forth across the antique Persian rug. She was 55 years old and dressed in an immaculate peach-colored tailored suit that she had just worn to morning service at our megachurch in downtown Atlanta. A pristine designer handbag rested on the crook of her arm, a glaring symbol of the wealth she constantly flaunted. Her high heels clicked sharply against the restored hardwood floors, sounding like a ticking clock in the tense silence of the room. "Your dementia is getting significantly worse, Mama," Valerie stated, her voice dripping with a calculated, icy authority. Her tone was completely devoid of the sweet, pious warmth she used when greeting the church elders just hours earlier. "If you do not sign this house over to me today, the state will step in and take it. You cannot seriously be planning to leave a historic $2 million property in Sweet Auburn to Zariah." I pressed my back against the closet wall, controlling my breathing. Sweet Auburn was not just any neighborhood. It was the beating heart of Black history in Atlanta, and my grandmother's house was a generational treasure that had been in our family for over 7 decades. Valerie stopped pacing and glared down at my grandmother, who sat trembling in her floral armchair. "She is a broke, single dropout who cannot even afford a decent car," Valerie continued, her voice rising with unmasked disgust. "Zariah is an absolute embarrassment to this family legacy. Do you really think a girl who can barely scrape together rent money is capable of paying the exorbitant property taxes on a historic estate? She will lose the house in a matter of months, and our family name will be a laughingstock." I listened to my own mother assassinate my character with practiced ease. There were no tears streaming down my face. I had cried all my tears over my mother's rejection years ago. Instead of crying, my mind immediately shifted into analytical mode. My mother was pushing a medical power of attorney form, a document that gave her sweeping rights over my grandmother's healthcare decisions. But she was speaking about real estate transfers and property taxes. The math of her argument did not align with the legal reality of the paperwork she was shoving into my grandmother's shaking hands. Something was deeply wrong, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. Before my grandmother could muster the strength to defend me or herself, the heavy front door opened again. Heavy, confident footsteps echoed in the foyer, and my brother-in-law, DeAndre, stepped into my line of sight. DeAndre was 32 years old, devastatingly handsome, and wore a custom-tailored navy suit that screamed new money. He was married to my younger sister, Chloe, the undisputed golden child of the family. DeAndre worked as a high-profile wealth manager, constantly bragging about his elite investment portfolio and his luxury vehicles. In my parents' eyes, he was the flawless golden son-in-law who could do absolutely no wrong. DeAndre walked straight to the coffee table and aggressively slammed a silver pen down next to the legal documents. His usual charming smile was entirely absent, replaced by a cold, predatory sneer. "Sign it, Nana," DeAndre commanded, his voice laced with intimidation. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. My wealth management firm will take over the property. We will manage the asset, renovate the historic block, and ensure it generates proper revenue. You do not want your precious little Zariah drowning in financial ruin because she is too incompetent to handle a real estate portfolio, do you?" Through the closet louvers, I watched my grandmother shrink back into her chair. Nana Pearl was 78 years old, and while her body was becoming frail, her mind was still incredibly sharp. She did not have dementia, despite what my mother was trying to claim. She was simply an elderly woman terrified of the greedy vultures standing in her living room. Nana Pearl looked at the pen, then looked up at my mother with tears in her eyes. "I will not sign away the house that my husband built with his own 2 hands," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "I promised him I would keep it safe for Zariah." The moment she refused, the atmosphere in the room shifted from manipulative persuasion to outright hostility. Valerie crossed her arms, her face twisting with rage. DeAndre let out a loud, mocking sigh of frustration. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his latest smartphone. He tapped the screen aggressively, holding the phone up for my grandmother to see. "We tried to do this the easy way, Nana," DeAndre said, his tone turning dangerously soft. "But since your mental decline is making you uncooperative, I am going to make a phone call right now. I have a private ambulance waiting on standby just a few blocks away." My grandmother gasped, her hands flying up to clutch her chest in genuine panic. DeAndre leaned over her, invading her personal space to maximize the intimidation. "If you do not sign that medical power of attorney right this second," DeAndre threatened, "I will call the paramedics. We will tell them you are having a severe psychotic episode." With this medical document, Valerie has the full legal authority to place you in a psychiatric hold at a state facility. Do you know what happens to confused, elderly women in state-run psychiatric wards? They fade away in a cold room, medicated until they cannot remember their own names. Sign the paper, or you will never see the inside of this beautiful house again. The sheer cruelty of the threat hung heavily in the air. My mother stood completely silent, a willing accomplice to the psychological torture of her own mother. She watched with a cold, detached expression as DeAndre prepared to dial the number. They were not just trying to steal generational wealth. They were perfectly willing to destroy an innocent elderly woman's life to get their hands on a multi-million-dollar property. They thought they held all the cards. They thought there was absolutely no one in the world who could stop their ruthless plan. They were entirely wrong. I placed my hand on the brass knob of the closet door and pushed it open with enough force that it banged loudly against the hallway wall. The sudden, violent noise shattered the tense silence in the living room. Valerie jumped backward, letting out a sharp scream of surprise. DeAndre spun around, nearly dropping his expensive smartphone. I stepped out of the dark, dusty closet and into the bright sunlight flooding the living room. I was not holding a weapon. I was not screaming or crying like the emotionally unstable failure they constantly painted me out to be. I was holding my sleek, encrypted federal government tablet, an item issued exclusively to investigators working for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I stood tall, squaring my shoulders, looking directly into the panicked eyes of the golden son-in-law. "Put the phone down right now, DeAndre," I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority and a chilling calmness that made my mother physically recoil. A medical power of attorney does not grant you or my mother the legal right to execute real estate transfers or seize property assets. It is legally useless for your little real estate scheme. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, my eyes locked on his pale face. "The only reason you are so desperately trying to force an illegal transfer of a $2 million property today is because you are running out of time. Unless, of course, you are planning to use my grandmother's historic deed as collateral to quietly cover the massive $800,000 shortfall I just spotted in your wealth management firm's Q3 federal tax filings." The silence that followed my statement was deafening. The arrogance drained completely from DeAndre's face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated dread. He stared at the glowing screen of my federal device, realizing in an instant that his perfect facade was crumbling. The hunt had officially begun. Valerie gasped. The sound was sharp and ragged in the quiet living room. The shock on her face quickly morphed into an ugly and contorted rage. Before I could even lower my tablet, she lunged forward. Her hand struck across my cheek with a loud crack. The force of the slap snapped my head to the side. The heavy gold rings on her fingers bit into my skin. They left a stinging and burning sensation along my jawline. "How dare you break into your brother-in-law's private files?" Valerie screamed. Her pristine church facade was completely disintegrating right in front of me. "You jealous and bitter little girl. You have always tried to tear down anyone doing better than you." I slowly turned my head back to face her. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to touch my stinging cheek. I simply tasted the faint metallic tang of blood where my teeth had caught my inner lip. I swallowed the blood and looked her dead in the eye. "I did not break into anything, Mother," I said. I kept my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. DeAndre's corporate accounts were flagged by an automated federal tracking system. I am a certified forensic accountant for the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I have Level 4 federal clearance. I access those files legally and securely and with full government authorization. Valerie blinked. She was momentarily derailed by my response. For my entire adult life, my family had deliberately chosen to misunderstand my career. When I graduated with my accounting degree and accepted a government position, my father had sneered in absolute disgust. They called me a glorified tax calculator. They told their wealthy country club friends that I was just doing basic bookkeeping for a low-level agency. They claimed that government work was supposedly beneath our family's entrepreneurial status. They worshipped business owners. They celebrated flashy entrepreneurs, even the fraudulent ones, while looking down on honest public servants. They had absolutely no idea what my job actually entailed. They had no clue that my badge gave me the supreme authority to freeze major assets, seize luxury properties, and put wealthy financial predators in federal prison. I watched my mother's eyes dart around the room as her brain struggled to process the gravity of my federal position. DeAndre let out a sharp and breathless laugh. The initial dread that had paralyzed him just moments ago was quickly replaced by his trademark arrogance. He adjusted the crisp cuffs of his expensive tailored suit. He rolled his broad shoulders as if he was simply shaking off the tension. He stepped forward with heavy boots. He closed the distance between us until he was aggressively invading my personal space. He loomed over me. He tried to use his height and muscular build to physically intimidate me into backing down. "You really think a shiny little badge makes you a threat to me?" DeAndre whispered. His voice dropped to a sinister and mocking register that was meant to instill fear. He leaned in so close I could smell the expensive designer cologne he bathed in every morning. I manage millions of dollars for the most elite clients in Atlanta. I play golf with state senators, high-profile real estate developers, and powerful judges. You are nothing but a jealous spinster who sits in a gray cubicle all day long. No one in this city is going to believe a bitter and lonely government drone over Atlanta's rising financial star. You are completely out of your league, Zariah. You bring this up to anyone, and I will have my corporate lawyers bury you so deep you will never see daylight again. They will take your shiny little badge. They will take your precious federal pension. They will drain whatever pathetic savings you have managed to scrape together over the years. I will make sure you are totally ruined. I held my ground firmly. I did not take a single step backward despite his overwhelming physical presence. Your expensive corporate lawyers cannot argue with a negative balance sheet, DeAndre, I replied with absolute calmness. And they certainly cannot argue their way out of federal wire fraud charges. DeAndre scoffed loudly. His eyes gleamed with malicious delight as he decided to hit me where he knew it would cause the maximum amount of psychological pain. This is exactly what you did back in college, he taunted. A cruel smirk twisted his handsome features into something ugly. This is just like when you accused Chloe of stealing your college tuition money to fund her first business venture, right? You always play the victim card. You love making up wild stories because you cannot handle the simple fact that she is infinitely better than you. My chest tightened painfully, but I kept my face utterly blank. He was deliberately weaponizing the deepest and most painful betrayal of my youth. When I was 20 years old, the dedicated savings account my grandfather had left for my final 2 years of college was suddenly and inexplicably drained. My mother had authorized the massive withdrawal. She had handed the money straight to my sister Chloe, so Chloe could launch a frivolous online clothing boutique. When I discovered the theft and confronted them, Valerie lied to the entire extended family. She told everyone at our church that I had carelessly gambled the money away. She claimed I was blaming my innocent sister to cover my own shameful tracks. Because of their lies, I had to work 3 exhausting jobs just to finish my degree. I was sleeping barely 3 hours a night, scrubbing diner floors and filing paperwork, while Chloe bought designer bags and built a fake luxury brand on my stolen funds. Look at where you are now, DeAndre continued, gesturing dramatically around the vintage living room. Look at who has the massive diamond ring. Look at who lives in the multi-million-dollar mansion. Look at who commands the absolute respect of this entire family. It is Chloe. It is me. You are nothing but an unwanted footnote in this family legacy. You cannot touch us. We are completely untouchable. Before I could tell him exactly how touchable his frozen bank accounts were, the heavy and rhythmic thud of aggressive footsteps echoed loudly in the hallway. The heavy oak front door had opened and closed again. This time, the true architects of my lifelong misery had finally arrived at the house. My father, Desmond, walked purposefully into the living room. He was 58 years old, a proud and incredibly arrogant man who walked with his chest puffed out. He constantly demanded immediate submission and absolute respect from everyone in his presence. Walking right beside him, clinging tightly to his left arm, was my sister Chloe. Chloe was 30 years old and the undeniable golden child of our extended family. She was heavily pregnant, her belly pushing prominently against a tight and custom-made silk maternity dress that cost more than my monthly rent. Large diamonds sparkled at her throat and on her wrists. The expensive jewelry caught the bright sunlight streaming through the living room windows. She looked exactly like a cover model for a luxury lifestyle magazine. She was completely oblivious to the massive financial crimes actively funding her glamorous wardrobe and her perfect aesthetic. Desmond did not even glance at my grandmother. Nana Pearl was still sitting and trembling in her floral armchair, completely ignored by the man supposed to protect her. Desmond's furious gaze locked entirely on me. In his right hand, he clutched a thick stack of formal legal papers. The top page featured a bright red stamp from the county clerk office. Desmond marched up to me. He raised the stack of heavy papers like a weapon designed to destroy my life. He slapped the documents hard against my chest, forcing me to grab them with both hands before they could fall to the floor. I looked down at the bold lettering printed across the top of the white page. It was a formal and legally binding eviction notice, and it bore my exact name. I stared at the black ink forming my name on the eviction notice. The document was an aggressive escalation, proving they were desperate to force me out of the historic house before I could stop their malicious property transfer. I slowly lifted my eyes from the crisp paperwork and looked directly into my father's cold face. He stood there with his arms crossed over his broad chest, radiating absolute confidence. He truly believed he had completely outsmarted me. He believed this eviction notice was the final word that would send me running away in tears. He had absolutely no idea his aggressive actions were simply handing me the exact evidence I needed to permanently destroy his fraudulent empire. The crisp paper slid from my chest and fluttered to the vintage Persian rug. I did not bend down to pick it up. Instead, I shifted my gaze to my sister. Chloe immediately stepped behind our father, using his broad shoulders as a physical shield. She placed one perfectly manicured hand over her pregnant belly and brought her other hand to her forehead in a theatrical display of distress. "Zaria, you are stressing me out," Chloe whined. Her voice was shrill and incredibly grating. "You know my blood pressure spikes when there is negative energy in the room. You are literally endangering my unborn child with your toxic behavior." I stared at her. She was wearing a custom silk maternity dress that probably cost $3,000, paired with a massive diamond tennis bracelet that caught the afternoon sunlight. She looked completely ridiculous standing in our grandmother's modest living room, acting as though she was the victim of a vicious assault. "I just want to build something beautiful for this family," Chloe continued, forcing a fake sob into her voice. DeAndre stepped forward and wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. "My beauty brand is a multi-million-dollar empire, Zaria. I have over 2 million followers on Instagram who rely on me for luxury aesthetics. My investors are demanding a physical location. I absolutely need this historic property for my new flagship headquarters. It is the perfect aesthetic for my new organic skincare launch. Sweet Auburn is gentrifying, and I need to stake my claim before some other influencer steals my vision. You are just being selfish and standing in the way of true generational wealth." Generational wealth. The buzzword my family used to justify their insatiable greed. I looked at my grandmother, Nana Pearl, who was quietly weeping in her armchair. She had lived in this house for 50 years. She had hosted community meetings during the civil rights movement right here in this living room. And now her own granddaughter wanted to gut the place to sell overpriced face creams. "You want to turn Nana's home into a cosmetic store?" I asked. My voice was dangerously low. "It is business, Zaria!" "My father," Desmond barked. He took a menacing step forward, intentionally crushing the eviction notice beneath his heavy leather loafer. "You have exactly 24 hours to clear your pathetic belongings out of the guest room upstairs. We are done playing nice with you. We have already contacted a state care facility. We are moving your grandmother there tomorrow morning. It is a perfectly adequate home for someone in her declining mental state. Chloe is actively building a corporate empire. She is taking the Wilson family name to the next tax bracket. You are doing absolutely nothing but standing in the way of progress. You are a dead weight on this family." The sheer magnitude of my father's betrayal was suffocating. He was talking about his own mother. He was casually discussing tossing the woman who raised him into a sterile, state-funded nursing home just so his favorite daughter could have a trendy brick-and-mortar store for her social media followers. He did not care about Nana Pearl. He did not care about the history of the house. He only cared about the prestige and the bragging rights he would get at the country club when Chloe opened her doors. I did not yell back. I did not scream or throw a tantrum. The old Zariah, the insecure girl they had bullied for decades, might have collapsed in tears. But the woman standing in the living room today was a federal investigator who dealt with ruthless criminals on a daily basis. My family was no different than the tax-evading cartel bosses I audited for the government. I turned my attention entirely to Chloe. I let my eyes slowly travel up and down her expensive outfit, lingering intentionally on the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. She shifted uncomfortably under my intense scrutiny, her fake tears drying up instantly. "Are you absolutely sure you want to open a flagship retail store right now, Chloe?" I asked. I tilted my head, keeping my expression entirely neutral. Chloe blinked, her perfectly applied false eyelashes fluttering in confusion. "Of course I am sure. My brand is expanding. We are scaling globally." I took a slow step toward her. I watched her grip on DeAndre's arm tighten. "Scaling globally," I repeated. "That is a very interesting choice of words. It is especially interesting considering your primary manufacturer in Shenzhen just filed a massive international lawsuit against your holding company." The color instantly drained from Chloe's face. Her jaw dropped slightly. DeAndre stiffened beside her, his protective stance faltering as confusion washed over his features. Even my father, who was previously radiating aggressive confidence, froze in place. I continued speaking with a calm, surgical precision. "You owe that factory for 6 months of unpaid invoices. They have officially halted all production on your organic skincare line. In fact, they are refusing to release the cargo containers sitting at the port in Los Angeles until you wire them the $1.2 million you currently owe in arrears. You do not have a multi-million-dollar empire, Chloe. You have a mountain of crushing debt and a warehouse full of empty plastic bottles. You are a complete fraud." "Stop lying!" Valerie screamed from the corner of the room. My mother rushed forward, her face twisted in denial. "Chloe is highly successful. Her accountant sends us the profit and loss statements every single quarter." I did not even look at my mother. I kept my eyes locked on my sister. "Her accountant is a paid actor," I stated smoothly. "Her entire business model is built on drop-shipping cheap chemical compounds and slapping a luxury label on them. The federal tracking system flagged her overseas wire transfers 3 weeks ago. She has been desperately trying to secure emergency loans from predatory lenders just to keep her website domain active. If she tries to sign a commercial lease for this historic property, the international debt collectors will immediately place a lien on the house. You will lose the property before you even cut the ribbon on opening day." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked at DeAndre, hoping her husband would defend her, but DeAndre was staring at her in absolute horror. He was a wealth manager, a man obsessed with status and financial appearances. The realization that his trophy wife was secretly drowning in millions of dollars of overseas debt was clearly destroying his fragile ego right in front of my eyes. Desmond realized he was losing control of the room. His golden child was being publicly dismantled. The illusion of their massive wealth was cracking. He stepped directly between me and Chloe, his face dark red with fury. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger right between my eyes. "You think you are so smart with your little spreadsheets, Zariah," Desmond growled. His voice vibrated with a vicious, uncontrollable anger. "You think your little government job gives you the right to investigate your own flesh and blood? You think you can just march in here and destroy your sister's reputation?" "I am not destroying anything, Dad," I replied evenly. "I am simply reading the ledger. Numbers do not lie, even if this entire family does." Desmond let out a dark, sinister smirk. The expression was so devoid of paternal love that it made my stomach turn. He dropped his hand and straightened his posture, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Well, you are too late," my father declared triumphantly. "You can recite all the overseas lawsuits you want. You can flaunt your little federal badge. It does not matter anymore. You have completely lost this war." I narrowed my eyes, analyzing his sudden shift in confidence. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "I already co-signed a commercial bridge loan using this exact property as collateral," Desmond sneered. "I signed the paperwork 48 hours ago to secure emergency venture capital funding for DeAndre's new investment firm. We leveraged the full appraised value of this historic estate. The ink is dry. The funds have already been wired into our corporate accounts. We do not need your grandmother's permission anymore. We do not need her signature on a medical power of attorney to execute a transfer. The bank practically owns this house now, and they are fully prepared to liquidate the asset if we default. We got the cash, and you are standing in a house that belongs to a corporate lender." I felt a sudden sharp coldness wash over my entire body. My brain rapidly processed the horrific magnitude of his confession. My father had committed blatant bank fraud. He had forged the necessary collateral documents to leverage a property he did not legally own, all to fund a high-risk venture for his son-in-law. He had risked my grandmother's only shelter, her only remaining asset, just to maintain the illusion of their massive wealth. He had quite literally sold the roof over his own mother's head to protect his fragile pride. "You committed wire fraud," I stated. The gravity of the crime hung heavy in the stifling air of the living room. "You forged documents to secure a commercial loan against a property deed you do not possess. That is a federal offense, Dad. You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary." My father laughed. It was a booming, arrogant sound that filled the room. "Prove it," he challenged, spreading his arms wide. "I am a respected pillar of this community. I am a senior deacon at our church. DeAndre manages accounts for the most powerful politicians in the state of Georgia. Who is a judge going to believe? A decorated businessman with a pristine public record, or a bitter, jealous daughter who has always hated her successful family?" The bank accepted my signature. The underwriters approved the loan. The money is ours. You can take your little IRS tablet and cry all the way back to your miserable apartment. Valerie stepped up next to my father, her face glowing with malicious triumph. She linked her arm through his, presenting a united front of absolute corruption. "We are the Wilson family, Zariah," my mother said, her voice dripping with poison. "We do whatever it takes to secure our legacy. Chloe needs a fresh start. DeAndre needs capital to expand his firm. Your grandmother is too old to appreciate the value of this land. We made an executive family decision. You are evicted. You are entirely cut off. And if you dare speak a single word of this to anyone outside this room, we will use our new funding to hire legal counsel that will destroy your life." I looked at the four of them standing together. My father, my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. They were a syndicate of greed and narcissism. They had convinced themselves that their crimes were justified simply because they desired a luxurious lifestyle. They believed they were gods in their own tiny universe. I glanced back at Nana Pearl. She was looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. She had heard her own son proudly confess to stealing her home. She had heard her daughter-in-law cheerfully agree to send her to a state-funded psychiatric ward. The devastation on her wrinkled face was the final catalyst I needed. Any lingering hesitation, any tiny shred of daughterly loyalty I might have unconsciously harbored, instantly evaporated. I did not argue with my father. I did not try to explain federal banking regulations to a man who thought his church title made him immune to the law. I knew exactly what a bridge loan entailed. I knew exactly how fast commercial lenders moved when they detected fraudulent collateral. My father thought he had executed a brilliant financial maneuver. He had actually just handed me the very rope I would use to hang them all. I slowly reached down and picked up the crumpled eviction notice from the floor. I smoothed out the creased paper with deliberate, meticulous movements. The silence in the room was absolute as they watched me. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the tears. I looked at my father and gave him a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "You have exactly 24 hours to celebrate, Dad," I said softly. "Because by this time tomorrow, you are going to realize that your executive family decision was the most catastrophic mistake of your entire life." I looked at the crumpled eviction notice in my hand and made a rapid, tactical calculation. There was absolutely no point in engaging in a screaming match with a room full of delusional narcissists. You cannot yell a fraudulent bank loan out of existence. My father had already committed the crime. The bridge loan was executed. The immediate priority was not winning an argument. The immediate priority was extracting the victim. I turned my back on my father, completely ignoring his arrogant smirk. I walked directly over to the hall closet, where I had been hiding just 20 minutes earlier. Tucked neatly beside the coats was Nana Pearl's folded transport wheelchair and her pre-packed emergency medical bag. I grabbed the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and smoothly unfolded the wheelchair with a loud metallic click. I wheeled the chair over to my grandmother. She was still sitting in her floral armchair, clutching her hands together. I leaned down and spoke in a quiet, reassuring tone. "We are leaving right now, Nana." I helped her stand up and carefully guided her into the wheelchair. She did not resist. She settled into the seat and gripped the armrests tightly. "Where do you think you are going?" Valerie snapped. Her voice was shrill and panicked. She rushed forward, her expensive high heels clicking frantically against the hardwood. "You are not taking her anywhere. She is legally incompetent. We are moving her to the care facility tomorrow morning." I did not even bother looking at my mother. I gripped the handles of the wheelchair and pushed Nana Pearl toward the front foyer. My father immediately stepped in front of the heavy oak door. He spread his arms wide, physically blocking our only exit. His face was purple with rage. "You are not walking out of this house with my mother, Zariah," Desmond boomed. His voice shook the glass panes in the front windows. "I am the head of this family. I make the decisions here. You will go upstairs, pack your trash bags, and get out of my sight. If you try to push past me, I will call the police and have you arrested for elder abduction." I stopped the wheelchair exactly 3 feet away from him. I did not flinch. I reached into my tailored blazer and pulled out my personal smartphone. I tapped the screen twice and cranked the media volume up to the absolute maximum. I pressed play. The crisp, clear audio recording echoed loudly through the foyer. It was DeAndre's voice, recorded perfectly from the dark confines of the cedar closet. "If you do not sign that medical power of attorney right this second, I will call the paramedics. We will tell them you are having a severe psychotic episode. With this medical document, Valerie has the full legal authority to place you in a psychiatric hold at a state facility. Do you know what happens to confused elderly women in state-run psychiatric wards?" The color instantly vanished from my father's face. DeAndre let out a strangled gasp from the living room. Chloe covered her mouth with her diamond-covered hand. I stopped the audio and looked directly into my father's terrified eyes. "I recorded every single word your golden son-in-law said while I was standing in that closet," I stated calmly. "I am currently holding a digital file of DeAndre actively threatening to falsely imprison a senior citizen in a state psychiatric ward to facilitate real estate fraud. Now, you have exactly 5 seconds to step away from that door. If you do not move, I am going to email this audio file directly to Pastor Evans at our megachurch. I will copy the entire board of deacons. I will send it to the local Atlanta news stations. I will let the entire congregation hear exactly how the great and pious Desmond Wilson treats his own elderly mother behind closed doors. My father was a man obsessed with his public image. His reputation at the church was his most prized possession. The absolute horror of public humiliation shattered his arrogant defiance. His chest deflated. He slowly lowered his arms and stepped away from the door, his eyes burning with a hateful, defeated rage. I pushed the wheelchair past him without a second glance. I opened the front door and guided Nana Pearl out into the warm Atlanta afternoon, leaving my toxic family standing in terrified silence in the foyer. I loaded Nana into the passenger seat of my practical, unremarkable Federal Fleet sedan. I threw her emergency bag and the wheelchair into the trunk. I did not drive to my apartment. I knew they would look for us there. Instead, I drove straight into the heart of Buckhead, navigating the heavy traffic until I reached an ultra-luxury, highly secure hotel. I walked into the lobby and paid for a 2-week stay in their premium executive suite, using cash from my secret emergency savings account. It was a fund I had been quietly building for years, specifically for the day I finally needed to sever ties with my family. Once we were safely inside the sprawling, immaculately decorated suite, the atmosphere instantly shifted. The heavy tension of the afternoon finally began to lift. I helped Nana Pearl onto the plush velvet sofa. I poured her a glass of cold water from the minibar. "Are you okay, Nana?" I asked, sitting down on the glass coffee table facing her. "I am so sorry you had to hear them say those things." Nana Pearl took a slow sip of water. Then she set the glass down and looked at me. The frail, terrified expression she had worn in the living room completely vanished. Her eyes were sharp, bright, and deeply intelligent. "I am perfectly fine, child," Nana Pearl said, her voice entirely steady. "I knew exactly what they were planning. I knew Desmond was trying to leverage the house. I knew Valerie was trying to get me declared legally incompetent. That is exactly why I called you yesterday and told you to come over unannounced and hide in the closet." I stared at her in shock. "You knew?" I asked. "Of course I knew," she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "I may be old, but I am not stupid. Your father is blinded by his own arrogance. He thinks because I am elderly, I do not understand banking notices. I saw the appraisal letters arriving in the mail. I heard them whispering in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. I knew they were going to try to force me out, but I also knew I could not fight them alone. I needed my smartest granddaughter to catch them in the act." A fierce rush of pride swelled in my chest. While my parents worshipped Chloe for her fake Instagram followers, Nana Pearl knew the truth. She knew I was the only one in the family with the intellect and the courage to actually protect our legacy. I stood up and walked over to my bag. "You rest, Nana," I said softly. "I have a lot of work to do." The physical confrontation was over, but the digital war had just begun. I set up my mobile workstation on the massive mahogany dining table in the corner of the suite. I booted up my IRS-issued encrypted laptop and inserted my federal smart card. I connected to the secure government VPN and launched the advanced forensic tracking software. My father had arrogantly bragged about co-signing a commercial bridge loan, using the Sweet Auburn property as collateral. He thought he had executed a brilliant financial loophole. He had actually left a massive, glowing digital footprint. I typed Desmond's social security number and the property address into the federal database. The system immediately pulled up the recent county clerk filings. There it was, a $5 million commercial bridge loan, initiated exactly 48 hours ago. Desmond had forged Nana Pearl's signature on a quitclaim deed, temporarily transferring the property into his name, and immediately leveraged it for cash. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking, but I did not stop there. I needed to see exactly where that $5 million went. I tracked the wire transfer from the commercial bank. The funds moved instantly into a corporate holding account registered to DeAndre's wealth management firm. I initiated a deep dive into DeAndre's corporate portfolio. For a man who bragged about managing elite wealth, his domestic accounts were surprisingly chaotic. Money was moving rapidly between dozens of different shell corporations. It was a classic layering technique used to obscure the original source of funds. I cracked my knuckles and leaned closer to the screen. I deployed a specialized tracing algorithm designed to follow international wire transfers. The software bypassed DeAndre's superficial domestic firewalls and followed the money trail directly to the Caribbean. I decrypted a hidden web of offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. As the financial statements populated on my screen, the horrifying truth of my family's new wealth began to materialize. I pulled up the corporate registration for Chloe's so-called multi-million-dollar Instagram beauty brand. DeAndre had claimed he was investing the bridge loan into her expanding empire, but the ledger showed a completely different reality. Chloe's company had zero actual revenue. There were no sales, no legitimate wholesale orders, and no profit margins. It was nothing but a hollow shell company. The offshore accounts showed massive, systematic deposits of unexplained cash flowing into Chloe's brand from unregulated foreign entities. The money would sit in Chloe's corporate account for exactly 3 days before DeAndre transferred it back out into clean, domestic real estate investments. My breath caught in my throat as the pieces of the puzzle slammed together. Chloe was not a beauty mogul. She was a glorified mule. DeAndre was not a brilliant wealth manager. He was running a massive, highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He was actively laundering millions of dollars for incredibly dangerous, underground criminal syndicates. He was using his naive, status-obsessed wife's fake beauty brand as the primary washing machine for dirty cartel money. The $5 million bridge loan my father had fraudulently secured was not for business expansion. It was a desperate panic move. DeAndre had lost the syndicate's money in a bad investment, and he needed liquid cash immediately to pay back incredibly violent people. I continued scrolling down the decrypted offshore banking documents, my eyes scanning the fine print. Suddenly, my blood ran completely cold. I found the master guarantor agreement for the offshore accounts. The document held the syndicate legally responsible for the laundered funds. Printed clearly at the bottom of the page, listed as the primary financial guarantors for the illegal offshore operation, were 2 very familiar names: Desmond and Valerie Wilson. My parents had not just co-signed a bridge loan. They were active, legally bound accomplices in a massive international money laundering operation. They had tied their own names, their own assets, and their own lives to ruthless criminals, all to fund Chloe's fake designer lifestyle. If this Ponzi scheme collapsed, the federal government would not just seize their assets, the cartel would come for their lives. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen as the gravity of the situation settled over me in the quiet hotel suite. My family was not just toxic, they were deeply, irreversibly criminal. And tomorrow morning, I was going to rip their entire fake empire straight to the ground. I did not sleep a single wink that night. Instead, I spent the next 8 hours downloading, encrypting, and meticulously printing every damning financial record I had unearthed from the offshore servers. By the time the warm morning sun began to rise over the Atlanta skyline, I had compiled a heavily weaponized portfolio of DeAndre's fraudulent transactions. I secured the physical documents in a sleek leather briefcase and left Nana Pearl sleeping peacefully in the master bedroom of the hotel suite. I quietly locked the door behind me and headed straight for the elevator. It was time to take the fight directly to their front door. DeAndre's wealth management firm was located in one of the most exclusive, hyper-modern glass skyscrapers in the heart of Buckhead. The building screamed corporate prestige. It was entirely designed to intimidate working-class people and stroke the egos of the ultra-rich. I parked my Federal Fleet sedan in the underground garage and took the express elevator up to the 40th floor. When the polished steel doors slid open, I stepped into a reception area that looked more like a modern art museum than a financial institution. White marble floors stretched out beneath a massive, glittering crystal chandelier. A young receptionist with a flawless blowout and a headset immediately stood up from behind her pristine reception desk. She held up a hand adorned with a delicate French manicure. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with practiced corporate condescension. "Do you have a scheduled appointment with one of our wealth managers? You cannot just walk in here unannounced." I did not break my stride. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my leather credential case, and flipped it open. The heavy gold federal badge gleamed under the chandelier lights. "Criminal Investigation Division, Internal Revenue Service," I stated, my voice echoing sharply against the marble walls. "I am not here for an appointment. Sit back down and do not touch your phone." The receptionist gasped, her eyes going wide as she practically collapsed back into her ergonomic mesh chair. She raised her hands in surrender and remained perfectly silent. I bypassed her desk and marched down the plush, carpeted executive corridor. The layout of the office was incredibly predictable. The most important meetings always took place in the grand corner boardroom. As I approached the end of the hallway, I could see them through the floor-to-ceiling frosted glass walls of the main conference room. DeAndre was standing at the head of a massive mahogany table. He was wearing a bespoke, charcoal gray suit that hugged his broad shoulders perfectly. He was gesturing enthusiastically toward a digital projection screen displaying a series of wildly fabricated, upward-trending revenue graphs. Sitting around the table were 6 highly affluent, influential Black businessmen. These were the elite titans of Atlanta real estate and commerce. They wore custom-tailored suits and heavy Rolex watches. These men controlled millions of dollars in legitimate capital, and DeAndre was actively pitching them, desperately trying to lure their clean money into his failing, cartel-backed Ponzi scheme to cover his massive offshore losses. My father, Desmond, sat proudly at DeAndre's right hand. He was nodding along to the presentation, acting as the elder statesman and primary guarantor to lend credibility to the fraudulent pitch. He was using his pristine church reputation to blindfold these wealthy investors. I did not knock. I raised my right foot and kicked the heavy glass door dead in the center. The door violently swung inward and slammed against the interior wall with a deafening, explosive crack that rattled the entire boardroom. The elegant, hushed atmosphere of the corporate pitch was instantly shattered. All 6 investors jumped in their heavy leather chairs, whipping their heads around to stare at me in absolute shock. DeAndre froze mid-sentence, his laser pointer trembling slightly in his hand. The arrogant, charming smile instantly melted off his handsome face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Desmond shot to his feet. His chair scraped harshly against the polished hardwood floor. The moment his eyes locked onto mine, his face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly fury. The veins in his thick neck immediately began to bulge against his crisp white shirt collar. "Zariah, what in God's name do you think you are doing?" Desmond bellowed. His deep voice boomed through the boardroom, entirely abandoning his carefully cultivated country club persona. I stepped into the room, my leather briefcase gripped tightly in my left hand. "I am just dropping off some updated financial projections for the Sweet Auburn property, Dad," I said. My voice was dangerously calm, contrasting completely with his explosive rage. "Since you and DeAndre are pitching a completely bankrupt fund, I figured these gentlemen might want to see the actual offshore balance sheets." The lead investor, a distinguished silver-haired man named Marcus Vance, frowned deeply. He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and looked back and forth between me and DeAndre. "Bankrupt fund," Marcus repeated, his baritone voice dripping with sudden suspicion. "DeAndre, who exactly is this woman, and what is she talking about?" DeAndre opened his mouth, stammering as he desperately searched for a lie to cover the sudden ambush. But my father did not give him a chance to speak. Desmond realized the entire illusion of their wealth was teetering on the edge of a cliff. He moved with a terrifying, aggressive speed. He lunged across the front of the mahogany table and closed the distance between us in 3 massive strides. Desmond grabbed my right arm. His large, heavy hand clamped down on my bicep like a vice grip. His thick fingers dug brutally into my muscle, causing a sharp, radiating pain to shoot straight down to my wrist. He practically lifted me off the floor as he forcefully yanked me backward toward the open glass door. "I am so incredibly sorry, gentlemen," Desmond announced loudly over his shoulder. He plastered a fake, apologetic, and deeply condescending smile on his face as he continued to drag me backward. "Please forgive this completely unacceptable interruption. This is my youngest daughter, Zariah. She is severely mentally unstable. She is a bitter college dropout who has been struggling with psychotic delusions for years. She has a terrible habit of having these manic episodes whenever she is off her medication. Please, excuse her behavior. DeAndre and I will handle this unfortunate family matter immediately." He was weaponizing the same exact lies they had used to destroy me in the past. He was using my historical vulnerability, painting me as a crazy, jealous failure to instantly discredit my authority. The investors looked visibly uncomfortable. A few of them averted their eyes, buying into the narrative of the tragic, unstable daughter throwing a public tantrum. Desmond yanked my arm again, dragging me out of the boardroom and into the plush corridor. But he had vastly underestimated me. I was not fighting to stay in the room. I was simply waiting for the perfect angle. As Desmond forcefully pivoted my body toward the hallway, I used the momentum of his own violent pull. I swung my left arm forward, whipping a single, heavily redacted tax document out of my briefcase. I flicked my wrist with absolute precision. The crisp, white piece of paper sailed through the air like a dart. It landed perfectly flat right on the mahogany table, sliding to a stop exactly 2 inches in front of Marcus Vance's folded hands. Marcus instinctively looked down at the document. The bold red ink at the top of the page was impossible to miss. It was an official federal audit summary of DeAndre's primary investment fund, the exact fund he was pitching on the screen behind him. The total available balance listed at the bottom of the column was a staggering, undeniable 0. Marcus Vance's eyes widened in absolute shock. He slammed his hand down flat over the document, securing it against the table before DeAndre could even step forward to snatch it away. Marcus looked up, his gaze locking onto DeAndre with a cold, predatory realization. The seed of total financial destruction had been successfully planted. Desmond did not notice the document drop. He was too consumed with blinding rage. He shoved me forcefully down the corridor, pushing me toward the bank of elevators. His grip on my arm was bruising, leaving dark marks against my skin. "You stupid, worthless girl," he hissed under his breath, his voice vibrating with venom. "I told you I would destroy you if you interfered with this family. You are completely finished." He shoved me hard against the brushed steel of the elevator doors, just as a bright mechanical chime echoed through the lobby. The elevator doors instantly slid open. I stumbled backward, catching my balance just as my mother stepped out of the elevator cab. Valerie was dressed impeccably in a tailored cream pantsuit, clutching a massive, sweating iced latte in her hand. She took one look at me being physically manhandled by my father in the middle of DeAndre's executive hallway, and her face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. Without a single moment of hesitation, Valerie raised her hand and violently hurled her iced latte directly at my chest. The heavy plastic cup slammed against my collarbone. The lid popped off on impact, sending a freezing, sticky wave of iced coffee and milk splashing violently across my face and soaking the front of my silk blouse. The ice cubes clattered loudly against the marble floor. The sweet, cloying smell of vanilla syrup immediately filled my nose as the freezing liquid dripped down my chin and ruined my clothing. I gasped at the sudden, shocking cold, wiping the sticky coffee out of my eyes. "You are dead to us!" Valerie screamed. Her voice was unhinged, echoing wildly down the corporate hallway. "You are a disgusting, jealous little rat trying to ruin your sister's happiness. You are dead." At the mayor's gala this Saturday night, we are officially announcing Chloe's massive brand expansion to the entire city. And right after that, we are publicly cutting you out of the family trust in front of every important family in Atlanta. We are erasing your name from our legacy. Do not you dare even think about showing your pathetic face. Desmond shoved me roughly into the elevator cab. I stumbled backward, my wet shoes slipping slightly on the floor as I caught myself against the back railing. Desmond reached in and slammed his fist against the lobby button. The steel doors began to slide shut, framing my parents as they stood together in the hallway. Valerie was panting heavily, her chest heaving with rage. Desmond was glaring at me with murderous intent. They truly believed they had won. They truly believed that throwing a coffee on me and threatening to cut me out of a fake family trust would somehow silence me. As the elevator doors closed, sealing me inside the descending cab, I wiped the last drops of iced coffee from my cheek. I looked up at the digital floor indicator counting down. I was soaked, bruised, and officially disowned by my parents. But I was not crying. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. They had just invited me to the mayor's gala. They had just given me the exact time, the exact location, and the exact audience I needed to execute their total annihilation. Saturday night was going to be a bloodbath. By Wednesday morning, my phone was vibrating violently against the glass coffee table of the hotel suite. I picked up the device and watched a massive tidal wave of notifications flood my locked screen. My mother and sister had wasted absolutely no time executing their preemptive strike. They were aggressively deploying their most powerful social weapon. I unlocked my phone and opened the private community application for Oasis Fellowship, our family's 10,000-member megachurch. Valerie had posted a lengthy, dramatic essay to the main congregation board. She painted a tragic picture of a family in mourning over their severely troubled daughter. She claimed I had suffered a massive psychotic break, that I had stopped taking imaginary medications, and that I was violently lashing out at her perfect family due to deep-seated jealousy. Right below Valerie's post was a link to Chloe's latest Instagram live stream. I tapped the video. Chloe was sitting in her lavish living room, wearing absolutely no makeup to look appropriately distressed. She was sobbing into the camera, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She told her 2 million followers that her dangerously unstable sister had forcibly kidnapped their elderly grandmother in a manic episode. Chloe claimed I was holding Nana Pearl hostage and trying to extort the family business to fund my chaotic lifestyle. The comment sections were an absolute nightmare. Hundreds of church members were flooding the posts with prayer hand emojis, offering unsolicited sympathy to my poor, suffering parents. The congregation was openly condemning me, calling me a wicked child, and praying for my immediate institutionalization. Valerie and Chloe were intentionally utilizing the congregation to isolate me, assassinate my character, and build a public defense for the moment the authorities inevitably closed in on their fraudulent empire. I set the phone down. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. I felt a cold, calculating clarity. I made sure Nana Pearl was comfortably situated in the suite with her breakfast and her favorite television shows running. I locked the heavy hotel door behind me and drove my federal sedan straight into the heart of the city. I was going directly to the source of their fabricated morality. Oasis Fellowship was not a traditional church. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern commercial complex that featured a full-service coffee shop, a commercial bookstore, and a massive glass sanctuary that looked exactly like a professional sports arena. I bypassed the main entrance and walked straight into the executive administrative wing. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I ignored their protests. I pushed through the heavy double doors and marched directly into Pastor Evans' corner office. The room smelled of expensive leather and imported cologne. Pastor Evans was sitting behind a massive desk, wearing a custom-tailored suit and a gold watch that caught the morning light. He looked up, completely unsurprised by my sudden entrance. He did not look angry. He looked at me with a deep, theatrical, and incredibly condescending pity. "Zariah, please sit down," Pastor Evans said, using his smooth, practiced sermon voice. He gestured to a plush chair opposite his desk. "Your mother called me this morning. She warned me you were having a severe episode. We have been praying for your mental deliverance." I did not sit. I remained standing, planting my feet firmly on the expensive rug. "My mother is a liar and an active accomplice to federal wire fraud," I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "DeAndre is running a massive offshore Ponzi scheme laundering money for violent criminal syndicates. My father forged property documents to secure an illegal commercial bridge loan just to keep the cartel from killing them." "I am not having an episode, Pastor. I am a federal investigator, and I am telling you that the Wilson family is funding their tithes with dirty, illegal money." Pastor Evans did not gasp. He did not look shocked. He simply steepled his fingers together and let out a long, heavy sigh. He looked at me with the exact same dismissive arrogance my father constantly displayed. "Zaria, you are letting your worldly career ambitions cloud your feminine spirit," Pastor Evans murmured, shaking his head slowly. "DeAndre is a shining pillar of this community. He is an inspiration to young businessmen everywhere. In fact, DeAndre just blessed our new youth center building fund with a $100,000 cashier's check less than 2 hours ago." The Wilson family is the financial backbone of this ministry. You cannot just march in here making wild, defamatory accusations against God's favored servants simply because you are unhappy with your own life. The sheer, unapologetic hypocrisy of the man was staggering. He did not care about the truth. He did not care that my father was stealing from my grandmother. He only cared about the massive checks DeAndre was writing to keep the church's luxury operations running. The church was just another shell company to them. It was a place where criminals could purchase absolute moral immunity. "I highly suggest you step away from this destructive path, Zariah," Pastor Evans continued, his tone turning sharp and authoritative. "You need to return your grandmother to her rightful legal guardians. You need to seek professional psychiatric help immediately. And most importantly, you need to pray for a strong, godly husband to guide your chaotic heart and give you proper direction. You are a lost, bitter woman tearing down your own blood." I stared at him for a long moment. I committed his face, his custom suit, and his corrupt indifference to memory. I did not waste my breath arguing with a man whose loyalty was entirely dictated by a balance sheet. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the plush office, leaving the door wide open behind me. As I stomped down the carpeted hallway of the megachurch, the reality of my family's purchased grace hit me with brutal clarity. This dynamic was not new. It was the exact same script they had been running my entire life. I pushed past a massive digital screen displaying the church's upcoming events, and a vivid memory slammed into my mind. I remembered the Sunday of my high school graduation. I had graduated as the undisputed valedictorian of my class. I had secured a full-ride academic scholarship to a prestigious accounting program. It was the culmination of years of relentless, agonizing hard work. But on that exact same Sunday morning, my parents had forced me to sit entirely alone in the sweltering, unair-conditioned overflow, seating in the upper balcony. They had abandoned me in the cheapest seats in the building. Why? Because that was the exact same weekend Chloe had decided to launch her very first online clothing boutique. I remembered sitting in the dark balcony, sweating in my best dress, watching my parents parade Chloe across the brightly lit main stage. My father had written a massive 5-figure donation check to the church that morning. In exchange, Pastor Evans had called Chloe up to the altar. He had laid his hands on her shoulders, praying over her business venture, praising her incredible entrepreneurial spirit in front of 10,000 cheering people. My academic achievements were completely ignored. My hard work meant absolutely nothing. Chloe's boutique went bankrupt 3 months later, entirely funded by the college tuition money my parents had stolen from my savings account. But the applause at the church had been deafening. They had paid for a platinum seating tier that day, entirely in Chloe's name. Respect in this building, just like love in my family, was simply a financial transaction. If you could not buy the spotlight, you were banished to the dark. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the church lobby and walked out into the blinding, sweltering Atlanta heat of the parking lot. The asphalt radiated heat through the soles of my shoes. I was completely done with all of them. I was done seeking validation from people who worshipped money over basic human decency. I had the offshore account numbers. I had the fraudulent loan documents. I had the ultimate power to freeze every single asset they possessed. I reached my unmarked federal sedan parked near the back of the lot. I pulled my keys out of my pocket, but as I stepped toward the driver's side door, I froze. Something was trapped under the heavy rubber blade of my windshield wiper. It was a heavy, matte black envelope. It had no stamp. It had no return address. It was completely blank, sitting in stark, terrifying contrast against the white hood of my car. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs. I looked around the sprawling, mostly empty parking lot. There was no one nearby, no suspicious vehicles idling in the shade. Whoever had placed it there was already gone, but they had watched me walk into the church. They had known exactly which car was mine. I stepped forward, snatched the envelope from under the wiper blade, and ripped the thick paper open. A single glossy photograph slid out into the palm of my hand. I stared down at the image, and a paralyzing wave of ice flooded my veins. It was a high-resolution, perfectly clear photograph of the exact luxury hotel in Buckhead where I had hidden Nana Pearl. The photo was taken from across the street, zooming in directly on the specific windows of our executive suite on the 12th floor. I quickly flipped the photograph over. There was a short, neatly typed note taped securely to the back of the glossy paper. The words were simple, direct, and completely devoid of emotion. Sign the Sweet Auburn property deed over to DeAndre by Friday, or the old lady has a very tragic accident. Signed, DeAndre's Investors. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I crushed the photograph in my fist. The conflict had just escalated far beyond fraudulent bank loans and bitter family smear campaigns. DeAndre's cartel backers were no longer waiting in the shadows. They had found us. They knew exactly where my grandmother was sleeping, and they were actively threatening to murder her if they did not get their money. The air in my lungs turned to solid ice, but only for a fraction of a second. My intense federal training immediately overrode my biological fear response. I memorized the jagged handwriting on the note, secured the glossy photograph inside a clear plastic evidence bag from my glove compartment, and slammed my car into gear. I burned rubber tearing out of the mega church parking lot, my tires screaming against the hot asphalt. My grandmother's life was actively in danger. I grabbed my secure federal smartphone and dialed my immediate supervisor at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, Special Agent Thomas Sterling. He answered on the second ring. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I rapidly laid out the exact situation. I detailed the offshore cartel involvement, the massive scale of DeAndre's money laundering operation, the fraudulent commercial bridge loan my father had executed, and the direct, physical death threat delivered to my windshield regarding a federal witness. Sterling did not hesitate for a single moment. He immediately authorized a full, uncompromising criminal investigation based on my preliminary findings. More importantly, he initiated an emergency federal extraction protocol. By the time I navigated through the heavy Atlanta traffic and pulled into the underground parking garage of the Buckhead Hotel, a team of armed federal marshals in unmarked black SUVs was already establishing a secure perimeter around the building. I rode the service elevator up to the 12th floor, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I bypassed the main hallway, utilizing the maintenance corridors to reach our executive suite. I burst through the door. Nana Pearl was sitting exactly where I had left her, calmly watching a daytime television program with a cup of herbal tea resting on her lap. I quickly packed our few belongings, wrapped a thick shawl around her frail shoulders, and guided her wheelchair out the door. The federal marshals flanked us the entire way down to the secure loading dock. We were loaded into a bulletproof vehicle and driven entirely off the grid to a highly classified government safe house tucked deep in the dense forests of the North Georgia mountains. Once Nana Pearl was safely settled into a secure, comfortable room with armed agents stationed at the perimeter, I transformed the safe house dining room into a digital war room. I opened my encrypted federal laptop, connected 2 additional portable monitors, and logged directly into the highest clearance tier of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I did not sleep for the next 48 hours. I consumed nothing but black coffee and cold water. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I initiated the most aggressive, ruthless forensic financial audit of my entire career. The non-stop conflict with my family completely shifted from physical shouting matches to a silent, devastating digital war. I pulled every single bank statement, tax return, corporate filing, and wire transfer associated with the Wilson family name over the past 10 years. I fed the data into our advanced pattern recognition algorithms. I mapped every hidden LLC, every offshore shell corporation, and every fake vendor account DeAndre had ever created. The financial puzzle pieces snapped together with horrifying clarity. I traced the exact flow of the dirty money. DeAndre was taking massive deposits of illicit cartel cash and funneling it directly into Chloe's fake organic skincare brand. He categorized the cartel cash as legitimate retail revenue from imaginary international customers. Then, he would take clean, legitimate investment money from innocent Atlanta businessmen like Marcus Vance and wire those clean funds back to the cartel in the Cayman Islands as their laundered cut. But the market had recently shifted. DeAndre had made a catastrophic gamble with the cartel's money in a highly leveraged real estate development and lost everything. The cartel demanded their immediate return on investment. DeAndre had no clean money left to pay them. The violent underground entities threatened to slaughter him. That was exactly when my parents stepped in. Desmond and Valerie did not just blindly co-sign a simple business loan to help their struggling son-in-law. They actively, willingly committed federal wire fraud to save their own social status. They knew Chloe's beauty brand was a complete sham. They knew DeAndre was working with dangerous criminals. But rather than face the public humiliation of bankruptcy, rather than risk losing their country club memberships and their front row seats at the megachurch, my parents made a calculated, evil choice. They deliberately forged the deed to Nana Pearl's historic Sweet Auburn home. They used my grandmother's legacy to secure a $5 million commercial bridge loan from a predatory corporate lender. And the most damning piece of evidence was sitting right on my screen. I decrypted the final layer of the offshore cartel accounts. Desmond and Valerie Wilson were officially listed as the primary financial guarantors for the entire money laundering operation. They had legally bound their own names and assets to a ruthless criminal syndicate just to protect Chloe's fake luxury lifestyle. I pushed my chair back from the monitors. The glowing screens illuminated the dark safe house. My eyes burned from exhaustion. My body ached from sitting in the same rigid position for 2 days straight. I stared at the irrefutable digital proof of their absolute depravity. They were fully prepared to let my grandmother be thrown into a psychiatric ward or even murdered by cartel enforcers just to keep up appearances. They were perfectly willing to let me be ruined, sued, and publicly humiliated to protect their fraudulent empire. A heavy, suffocating pressure suddenly built up in my chest. I buried my face in my hands, and for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I wept. I sobbed into the quiet darkness of the room. But I was not crying out of sadness. I was not mourning the loss of my family. I was weeping out of a profound, overwhelming, and absolute freeing acceptance. For my entire life, I had desperately tried to earn their love. I had accepted their constant bullying, their harsh criticisms, and their blatant favoritism toward Chloe. I had internalized every cruel comment they ever made about my looks, my career, and my worth. I had spent decades believing that I was the broken one. But looking at the criminal dossiers glowing on my screens, the heavy chains of daughterly obligation finally shattered. They were not better than me. They were monsters. They were hollow, greedy, pathetic criminals who hid behind expensive clothes and hypocritical church donations. I was completely free. I owed them absolutely nothing. My tears dried up, leaving behind a cold, sharpened resolve that felt like solid titanium. It was Saturday evening. The sun was beginning to set behind the Georgia mountains, casting long, dramatic shadows through the windows of the safe house. Tonight was the annual Atlanta Mayor's Gala. It was the most prestigious, exclusive, and highly photographed social event of the entire year. It was the exact venue my mother had arrogantly declared they would use to announce Chloe's fake brand expansion and publicly cut me out of the family legacy. They were expecting to command the spotlight. They were expecting to be the absolute kings and queens of the city. I walked into the adjoining bathroom and turned on the bright vanity lights. I stripped off my shapeless gray federal accountant sweater and my boring slacks. I opened a protective garment bag I had brought with me from my apartment. Inside was a suit I had purchased months ago, but never possessed the confidence to actually wear. I pulled it out and slipped it on. It was a striking, impeccably tailored crimson-red designer suit. The sharp shoulders and sleek cut fit my body with deadly precision. It was a stark, unapologetic contrast to the invisible, plain clothes my family had always forced me to wear. I applied my makeup with the meticulous care of a soldier applying war paint. I pinned a small, discreet golden microphone to my lapel, linking it directly to the federal recording devices secured in my vehicle. I slid my heavy federal badge into my breast pocket. I stood in front of the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was not Zariah, the unwanted sister. She was not Zariah, the boring tax calculator. She was an apex predator. She was the executioner of the Wilson family empire. Suddenly, a sharp, vibrating buzz interrupted the silence of the room. I picked up my secure federal smartphone from the bathroom counter. A bright red automated alert flashed across the screen. I had set up a digital tripwire within the Fulton County Clerk's database, monitoring any legal movement on Nana Pearl's property deed. The notification was clear and undeniable. Desmond had just officially initiated the fraudulent foreclosure process on the Sweet Auburn estate. He was pushing the final paperwork through the system to finalize the bank transfer and hand my grandmother's home over to the commercial lenders. His absolute, blinding arrogance had led him to execute the final stage of the crime right before stepping onto the red carpet. The clock was officially ticking. The federal crime was actively in progress. I locked my phone, grabbed my car keys, and walked out of the safe house. It was time to attend a gala. The drive from the mountain safe house back into the glowing, electric perimeter of downtown Atlanta took exactly 90 minutes. I navigated the heavy Saturday night traffic with mechanical, relentless precision. The digital alert from the county clerk was still burning in my mind. Desmond had actually done it. He had officially initiated the fraudulent foreclosure process on Nana Pearl's historic Sweet Auburn home. He had triggered the final, irreversible phase of the federal crime. The commercial lenders were moving to seize the property, and the cartel investors were waiting for their laundered payout. The clock was not just ticking, it was actively striking midnight. The Four Seasons Hotel loomed ahead of me, a towering monolith of glass, steel, and brilliant golden light. A massive fleet of black luxury vehicles lined the curving valet entrance. Chauffeurs in sharp uniforms were rushing to open doors for the city's most affluent citizens. I bypassed the long, winding line of waiting cars. I flashed my heavy gold credential case at a startled valet attendant and parked my unmarked Federal Fleet sedan directly in the highly restricted VIP zone. I did not hand over my keys. Inside the building, the grand ballroom was dripping in manufactured opulence. I walked through the gilded foyer, taking in the scene. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering glow over Atlanta's black elite. Prominent local politicians, professional athletes, and highly influential business moguls mingled over towering centerpieces of imported, cascading white orchids. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and caviar. It was a perfectly orchestrated, intoxicating illusion of generational wealth and untouchable prestige. Through the sea of expensive designer gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos, I spotted my targets immediately. DeAndre and Chloe were holding court near the absolute center of the room, acting exactly like modern corporate royalty. DeAndre wore a bespoke midnight blue velvet tuxedo jacket. A smug, deeply relaxed smile was plastered across his handsome face as he warmly shook hands with a prominent city councilman. He was effortlessly charming the very politicians who were supposed to protect the city from men exactly like him. Chloe stood directly beside him, draped in a glittering, floor-length emerald gown that undoubtedly cost more than a public school teacher's annual salary. She was actively posing for a hired event photographer, tilting her chin up and angling her shoulders to ensure the camera flash perfectly caught the massive, blood diamond resting on her collarbone. They looked utterly invincible. They looked completely unbothered by the fact that violent cartel enforcers were actively threatening to murder their own grandmother just a few miles away. A few yards away from the golden couple, Valerie was aggressively cornering the mayor's wife. My mother was holding a crystal flute of champagne, gesturing wildly with her free hand as she boasted. Her sharp theatrical voice carried clearly over the low, elegant hum of the string quartet playing in the corner of the ballroom. She was bragging extensively about DeAndre, loudly praising her brilliant son-in-law and his supposedly incredible financial acumen. She was actively weaving the web of lies, ensuring every single influential ear in the room associated the Wilson family name with massive legitimate success. I stepped toward the grand arched entrance of the main ballroom. Two massive, broad-shouldered private security guards in dark suits immediately moved to block my path. They crossed their thick arms, their earpieces glowing faintly in the dim hallway light. One of them held up a heavy leather-bound guest list, giving my crimson-red suit a hard, dismissive, and highly judgmental look. "Excuse me, ma'am," the larger guard rumbled, stepping directly into my personal space to intimidate me. "This is a highly secure, private, invite-only event. If your name is not explicitly printed on this list, you need to turn around and walk out those front doors right now." I did not blink. I did not take a single step back. I reached smoothly into the breast pocket of my tailored jacket and pulled out my solid gold badge, flipping the leather credential case open right under his nose. "Federal Agent, Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division," I stated, my voice slicing through the heavy air like a scalpel. I am conducting an active, high-level federal criminal inquiry regarding organized syndicate activity. Step aside immediately, or you will be placed in federal handcuffs for obstructing an active investigation. The security guard's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own heavy tactical boots. He frantically waved his partner away, completely clearing the grand entrance. I snapped the leather credential case shut and walked past them without a second glance. I stepped over the threshold and into the sprawling, crowded ballroom. I did not try to blend in. I walked with the deliberate, heavy, and rhythmic stride of an apex predator entering a hunting ground. The striking, tailored crimson designer suit acted like a brilliant, blazing beacon in the sea of predictable black tuxedos and muted evening gowns. I was no longer the plain, quiet, highly forgettable sister who hid in the shadows of the background. I radiated an icy, undeniable, and absolute power. Heads immediately began to turn. Conversation slowly died out, trailing off into confused whispers as I cut a straight, unyielding path directly through the center of the crowd. The elegant music from the string quartet suddenly seemed to fade into the background. Wealthy socialites, influential politicians, and underground cartel investors parted like the Red Sea. Their eyes were entirely locked on the woman in the crimson suit, marching with lethal purpose directly toward the Wilson family. Valerie spotted me first. She was mid-laugh, clinking her crystal champagne flute with the mayor's wife, when her eyes caught the flash of bright red. The manufactured, high-pitched laughter died instantly in her throat, the color completely drained from her perfectly contoured face. For a split second, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Then, the shock morphed into a twisted, ugly, and uncontrollable rage that completely shattered her elegant country club facade. She slammed her champagne glass down onto a passing waiter's silver tray with such force that half the expensive liquid spilled onto the polished floor. She lunged forward, abandoning all social decorum. "Security! Get this trash out of here immediately!" Valerie shrieked. Her voice was unhinged, completely abandoning her refined, wealthy persona. She marched directly into my path, physically attempting to block me from getting any closer to the center of the room or the main stage. "I told you on Wednesday, you are no longer a part of this family. You are a psychotic, jealous embarrassment. You are severely mentally ill and you are ruining this event." Desmond, who had been laughing loudly with a group of commercial real estate developers, heard the chaotic commotion. He turned, and his face instantly darkened into a mask of pure, violent fury. He abandoned his conversation without a word of excuse and rushed over to intercept me. He truly thought he could use the exact same physical intimidation tactics he had used to control me his entire life. He believed he could bully me into submission in front of the city's elite. Desmond lunged forward and grabbed my right wrist roughly. His thick, heavy fingers dug into my skin with aggressive, bruising force. "You stupid, ungrateful girl," he growled, lowering his voice so only the people immediately surrounding us could hear his venom. "You are having another manic episode. You are going to turn around, walk out that door, and check yourself into a psychiatric hospital before I have the police drag you out of here in a straitjacket." He expected me to shrink. He expected me to cry, to apologize, to succumb to the lifelong psychological conditioning of complete submission. But the broken, terrified woman he was trying to grab no longer existed. I was a highly trained federal agent holding the absolute destruction of his entire fraudulent life in my breast pocket. I looked directly into my father's furious, arrogant eyes. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I smoothly and violently twisted my arm against his thumb, utilizing a basic, highly effective tactical release maneuver. The sudden, sharp leverage broke his bruising grip instantly. Desmond stumbled forward, completely caught off guard by the sudden physical resistance from the daughter he viewed as weak. I did not give him a single second to recover his balance. I stepped cleanly around him, brushing past my mother's outstretched, trembling hand, and walked with total, unwavering purpose toward the main stage at the front of the ballroom. The stage had been immaculately set up for the mayor's keynote address, complete with a heavy crystal podium and a professional, high-tier sound system. The entire ballroom was completely silent now. The thick tension in the air was suffocating. Every single guest, every politician, every cartel investor hiding in plain sight was watching my every move. DeAndre and Chloe stood frozen near the massive floral centerpieces, their faces pale masks of sudden, dawning terror. DeAndre recognized the look in my eyes. He knew exactly what was happening. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the main stage. I stepped directly up to the crystal podium and gripped the smooth edges with both hands. I leaned forward, looked out over the sea of terrified, expectant faces, and firmly tapped the head of the microphone. A loud, screeching wave of electronic feedback blasted through the massive ballroom speakers. The high-pitched noise halted the room entirely. Guests covered their ears, and the last remaining whispers vanished. Total, absolute silence reigned over the Four Seasons ballroom. "Good evening, Atlanta," I said, my voice echoing perfectly and powerfully across the vast, glittering room. "My family has a very special announcement regarding their wealth." The lingering, high-pitched screech of the microphone feedback hung heavily over the crystal chandeliers. The elite crowd of Atlanta shifted uncomfortably, their champagne flutes hovering frozen in mid-air. They were expecting a charitable donation speech or a polished corporate merger announcement. They certainly did not expect the forgotten black sheep of the Wilson family, radiating absolute authority in a tailored crimson suit, hijacking the mayor's spotlight. The silence in the room was absolute, pregnant with the kind of tension that precedes a devastating car crash. Chloe reacted first. Her survival instincts, honed by years of aggressively curating a fake online existence, kicked in with ferocious speed. She realized her entire carefully constructed universe was about to implode on live television. She dropped her sparkling designer clutch and sprinted toward the stage. The heavy emerald silk of her gown caught on the edge of a banquet chair, tearing with a loud, violent rip. But she did not care. "Cut the mic!" she shrieked, pointing frantically at the audio engineer stationed in the shadows off to the side. "Security, turn off the power right now. She is having a severe psychotic break. Help me!" Chloe clawed her way up the carpeted steps, her perfectly manicured hands reaching desperately for the microphone stand. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply shifted my weight to the left, using my shoulder to completely block her path, and reached smoothly into my blazer pocket. I pulled out a heavy, encrypted silver flash drive. The gala's hired DJ, a young guy in a sharp tuxedo, stared at me in absolute shock. I bypassed him completely, slamming the drive directly into the primary port of his open MacBook. I tapped a single, pre-programmed command key, completely overriding the venue's generic gala graphics. The 3 massive, high-definition projector screens positioned directly behind the main stage flickered to black. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom as the screens violently flashed to life, illuminating the entire room in a harsh, unforgiving white glare. "My sister Chloe claims to be a self-made beauty mogul," I announced, my voice booming relentlessly through the venue's premium sound system. "She sells you the illusion of a luxury cosmetics and lifestyle brand. She tells her 2 million followers that her empire is built on cutting-edge innovation and exclusive high-end manufacturing." I clicked a button on the presentation remote I had snatched from the podium. The screens shifted instantly. Massive, heavily stamped official federal customs documents appeared, entirely unredacted. The bright red seals of the United States government loomed over the audience. "But as you can see from these perfectly verified federal import logs," I continued, my tone clinical and devastating, Her luxury brand is nothing more than a cheap dropshipping front. Chloe is illegally importing counterfeit bags and toxic, unregulated chemical cosmetics from blacklisted overseas factories. I clicked the remote again. The screens displayed aggressive, multi-million-dollar international lawsuits, glaring red bank statements, and cease and desist orders from actual luxury design houses. The intricate web of her lies was laid bare in high resolution. "There is no empire," I stated clearly, letting the words echo against the marble pillars. "There is no wealth. Chloe Wilson's entire company has zero legitimate retail revenue. She does not design anything. She does not produce anything. She is currently sitting on exactly $2 million of hidden toxic debt, and her suppliers are actively suing her for fraudulent business practices." The collective reaction from the ballroom was deafening. Cell phones were instantly pulled out, camera lenses zooming in on the undeniable federal seals displayed on the 50-foot screens. The glittering facade of Atlanta's favorite influencer crumbled in real time. Influential socialites began whispering furiously. The elite businessmen who had just been praising her entrepreneurial spirit now looked at her with pure disgust. The realization that they had been rubbing shoulders with a cheap con artist sent ripples of absolute revulsion through the high society crowd. Chloe let out a guttural, humiliated wail. The pristine, confident mask she wore every single day completely shattered. She threw her hands over her face, unable to handle the agonizing reality of her public destruction. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the stage stairs, sobbing uncontrollably into her torn emerald dress, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. The golden child had officially fallen. From the center of the ballroom, Valerie completely lost her mind. "Lies!" my mother screamed, her voice cracking with pure, hysterical desperation. She shoved past the mayor's wife, spilling champagne down the woman's expensive couture dress. "It is all photoshopped. She is a sick, jealous girl trying to destroy her sister. Someone call the police right now. Turn off those screens. Arrest her." Valerie clawed at the air, her face twisted into an ugly mask of panic. She looked wildly around the room, expecting the high society crowd to rally to her defense, expecting the security guards to drag me away. But no one moved. The audio engineer remained paralyzed by the sheer gravity of the federal evidence displayed on his monitors. The crowd merely stepped back, creating a wide circle of isolation around my frantic mother. They were treating her like a highly contagious disease. The mayor's wife openly glared at her, brushing the spilled champagne from her gown with a look of supreme disdain. Valerie's pristine, carefully protected social standing evaporated in a matter of seconds. That was when DeAndre broke. The smooth, bespoke velvet suit could no longer hide the terrified, sweating criminal underneath. He realized that Chloe's exposure was just the first domino. If her finances were public, his offshore laundering operation was only seconds away from being exposed to the very people he was trying to scam. He locked eyes with three severe-looking men standing near the back exit. They were the cartel investors. They were not whispering. They were staring at him with cold, murderous intent. He charged the stage like a cornered, desperate animal. He shoved wealthy investors out of his path, his heavy footsteps thudding loudly against the wooden floorboards. Sweat poured down his forehead, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. "Do not listen to this crazy bitch!" DeAndre roared. He vaulted onto the stage, bypassing his sobbing wife without a single glance, and pointed a trembling finger at the crowd. He was panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically across the room, specifically tracking the men near the exit. "I manage millions of dollars for half the people in this room," DeAndre shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "We are completely solvent. This is a targeted smear campaign by a disgruntled, disowned family member. We own the historic Pearl Estate outright. We have total capital backing. My fund is secure. We are solid. I promise you our investments are completely untouchable." He was begging them. He was using my grandmother's home as a shield. leveraging stolen legacy to maintain a crumbling illusion. He was desperately trying to keep the cartel investors in the room from realizing their money was gone, buying himself enough time to figure out an escape plan. He tried to project power, but his trembling hands and sweating brow told the entire room he was lying. I stood my ground. I looked at the sweat dripping from his chin, then turned my gaze back to the stunned, silent crowd. I projected absolute, terrifying control. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of fear. I smiled dangerously, leaning directly into the microphone. "Are you sure about that, DeAndre?" I did not wait for his pathetic, stuttering response. I pressed my thumb down hard on the presentation remote. The massive 50-foot projector screens positioned directly behind the main stage shifted instantly. The humiliating documents detailing Chloe's counterfeit handbag lawsuits vanished. They were immediately replaced by an intricate, glowing web of raw financial data. Huge, glaring red letters flashed across the screens, casting a harsh, unforgiving crimson light over the entire Four Seasons ballroom. I had spent 48 straight hours, locked inside a secure federal safe house, mapping this exact digital takedown, and the presentation was flawless. I had linked every single one of DeAndre's domestic corporate bank accounts directly to the offshore Cayman Island accounts and the fake shell companies he used to hide the cartel cash. The flow of money was undeniable. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice slicing through the thick, terrified silence like a freshly sharpened scalpel. "I highly suggest you check your investment portfolios right now. DeAndre's firm isn't a wealth management company. It's a Ponzi scheme." I let that terrifying phrase echo against the marble pillars and crystal chandeliers. And as of 4 p.m. yesterday, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division has frozen every single asset. The elegant veneer of the mayor's gala vanished in a single, devastating heartbeat. Total, unadulterated pandemonium erupted. The soft, ambient glow of the room was immediately replaced by the harsh blue light of hundreds of smartphone screens as Atlanta's elite scrambled to verify my words. Men in custom-tailored tuxedos were frantically opening their banking apps, their faces turning ghost white in the glow of their devices. Women in designer evening gowns were hyperventilating, clutching their chests as they realized their lavish lifestyles had just been entirely wiped out. "Your retirement funds," I continued mercilessly, speaking directly over the rising tide of panic. "Your children's trust funds, your real estate capital, your generational wealth. None of it was ever invested in high-yield international markets. It was used to pay off DeAndre's aggressive, violent offshore creditors. He took your clean, legitimate money, wired it directly to a ruthless criminal syndicate, and printed you fake, perfectly formatted quarterly statements." Marcus Vance, the prominent real estate developer who had heavily backed DeAndre's initial fund, hurled his heavy crystal whiskey glass against the marble floor. The glass shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces, the sharp sound cutting through the chaos. "It is gone!" Marcus roared, his voice cracking with pure, primal rage as he stared unblinking at his phone screen. "Every single cent. The accounts are completely locked. There is a federal seizure notice on my dashboard." The crowd erupted into a frenzy of shouting. Wealthy investors abandoned all social decorum, surging forward and screaming obscenities at the stage. The mayor's private security detail instantly surrounded him, physically rushing him out of a side exit to distance him from the unfolding federal crime scene. DeAndre looked like he was going to pass out. The arrogant, smug swagger he had carried into the room had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, trembling shell of a man. His knees visibly buckled. He stumbled backward, desperately grabbing the edge of the crystal podium to keep himself upright. His mouth opened and closed rapidly, but no words came out. He was sweating profusely, thick beads of moisture ruining his expensive velvet jacket. He looked past the screaming investors and made direct, horrifying eye contact with the three severe-looking men standing near the back exit, the cartel enforcers. They were no longer just watching from the shadows. They were actively moving through the chaotic crowd, violently shoving panicked socialites out of their way, heading straight for the main stage. DeAndre was completely trapped. The federal government had seized his money, and the cartel was coming for his life. On the floor below the stage, Valerie was frantically trying to shield Chloe, who was still sobbing hysterically into her torn emerald dress. My mother was spinning in circles, her eyes wide with shock as she watched her untouchable social standing literally burn to ash around her. The society friends she had spent decades cultivating were now openly glaring at her with absolute unfiltered disgust. That was when Desmond stepped up. My father refused to accept that his empire was dead. He refused to accept that the daughter he had bullied, marginalized, and treated like a financial servant her entire life was the one holding the executioner's axe. He shoved his way to the front of the stage, his massive frame shaking with a terrifying combination of desperate rage and blind, absolute denial. He climbed the carpeted steps, completely ignoring the screaming mob behind him, desperately trying to salvage his pride and regain control of the narrative. "Quiet!" Desmond bellowed, his deep, booming voice struggling to overpower the chaos in the room. He waved his thick arms frantically at the panicked crowd. "Everyone just be quiet for 1 single minute." He turned his furious gaze to the angry investors, adopting his classic commanding business persona. He honestly believed he could charm his way out of a federal indictment. "We are the Wilsons," Desmond shouted, slapping a heavy hand against his own chest. "We have deep historical roots in this city. We have tangible, incredibly valuable assets. We are not going bankrupt over a temporary liquidity issue. Do not listen to this hysterical girl." He pointed a trembling, desperate finger out at the crowd. "We still have the sweet Auburn property," Desmond declared, his voice echoing with misplaced triumph. "My mother's historic estate is worth a fortune. I just took out a $5 million commercial bridge loan against it this very evening. The banking paperwork is processing right now. We have the capital. We can pay everyone back. Every single one of you will be made completely whole." I stood perfectly still, letting my lapel microphone pick up every single word of his loud, arrogant confession. He had just publicly admitted to initiating the fraudulent loan. He genuinely believed that throwing $5 million at a cartel debt would make the angry mob calm down and make the federal agents simply walk away. He was so completely detached from reality that he thought leveraging his own mother's stolen home made him a savior. Desmond turned his furious, bloodshot eyes back to me. He marched toward the podium, invading my personal space, trying to use his sheer physical size to intimidate me back into submission. "Zariah, stop this right now," he commanded, his voice dripping with venom and panicked authority. "Turn off those projector screens immediately. You are having a mental breakdown, and you are destroying the family name. You are ruining our legacy. Fix this right now before I ruin you." I did not step back. I did not flinch. I stared directly into the eyes of the man who had spent 3 decades making me feel small, invisible, and utterly worthless. I looked at his sweating forehead, his desperate, pleading eyes, and his pathetic, frantic clinging to a fraudulent status that no longer existed. I felt absolutely nothing for him. There was no pity. There was no lingering daughterly obligation. There was only the cold, hard, sharpened steel of ultimate justice. I smiled. It was a slow, dangerous, and completely ruthless expression that caused my father to physically recoil in shock. The invisible, compliant tax calculator was dead. "That's the funniest part, Dad," I said, leaning directly into the microphone so my voice carried crystal clear over the frantic ballroom. "You never owned that house. I clicked the presentation remote one final time. The massive 50-foot projector screens positioned directly behind the main stage shifted instantly. The complex, glaring red web of DeAndre's money laundering vanished. It was replaced by a stark, pristine, and heavily watermarked legal document. The thick black text of the header was impossible to misinterpret. It read, "Irrevocable Trust Agreement," in bold, unforgiving letters. The document was dated exactly 3 years ago. It was stamped with the official, raised seal of the Fulton County Superior Court and notarized by one of the most ruthless, unbribable estate attorneys in the entire state of Georgia. Desmond froze completely. His broad chest heaved as his eyes darted frantically across the glowing text, towering above his head. He squinted, his mind struggling to process the dense legal jargon, but the devastating reality of his monumental failure was already sinking deep into his bones. The arrogant, booming patriarch, who had just tried to physically intimidate me into silence, was rapidly transforming into a hollow, terrified shell. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was finally realizing there was no net to catch him. "You honestly thought Nana Pearl was senile?" I projected my voice clearly, making sure every single syllable cut perfectly through the deafening, paralyzed silence of the ballroom. "You thought she was just a frail, confused old woman sitting in her wheelchair, drinking her herbal tea while you plotted to steal her legacy right out from under her. You underestimated her, just like you have underestimated me for my entire life. Nana knew exactly who you were. She knew exactly how greedy, hypocritical, and utterly morally bankrupt you all were. She saw the rot inside this family long before I did." I stepped out from behind the heavy crystal podium. I paced the very edge of the stage, looking directly down at my father's sweating face. 3 years ago, while you were busy paying for Chloe's fake designer bags and financing DeAndre's phantom corporate summits, Nana and I sat down quietly with a team of elite federal estate planners. She willingly, legally, and permanently placed the historic Sweet Auburn property entirely into an irrevocable trust. It is an ironclad, impenetrable financial fortress. That house cannot be sold, transferred, leveraged, or used as collateral by anyone without the explicit, notarized signature of the primary trustee. I watched Desmond's jaw slacken. The sheer magnitude of his fatal miscalculation hit him like a runaway freight train. His entire strategy, his entire desperate bid to save his own social standing by sacrificing his mother's home, had been dead on arrival. "You forged Nana's signature on a completely meaningless piece of paper, Dad," I said, my tone dripping with absolute clinical disdain. "The deed you manipulated, the legal paperwork you arrogantly rushed through the county clerk's office just hours ago right before you put on your tuxedo, it is legally void. It has been legally void for 36 months. You went to a predatory commercial lender, presented them with fraudulent collateral, and eagerly signed your own name to a $5 million commercial bridge loan. You committed textbook, undeniable federal bank fraud for absolutely nothing. You do not have the cartel's money. You do not have the house. You have a worthless piece of forged paper and a massive federal target permanently painted on your back." Valerie let out a sound that was half shriek and half gasp. She pushed herself off the nearest banquet table, her perfectly coiffed hair now a disheveled, chaotic mess. The polished illusion of the high society matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a frantic, cornered animal lashing out blindly at the trap snapping shut around her. "Who is the trustee?" Valerie screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria as she pointed a violently shaking finger at the projector screen. "Tell me right now. We will sue them. We will drag them through civil court for decades. We will bankrupt whoever is hiding our property. I will destroy them. I will take everything they have." I did not answer her from the stage. I turned and walked slowly, deliberately down the carpeted steps. My crimson suit moved like a bright, consuming flame through the dark, terrified room. The wealthy guests parted even further, practically climbing over each other to give me a wide berth. No one wanted to be anywhere near the blast radius of the Wilson family. I walked right up to my mother. I stood mere inches from her face, looking down into her panicked, bloodshot eyes. I let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment before I delivered the final, fatal blow to the empire she had built on lies. "You are looking at her," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that still carried perfectly through the sensitive lapel microphone. "I am the sole trustee. I own the house. I own the historic estate. I own the legacy you tried to rip away from a defenseless old woman." Valerie staggered backward, as if I had physically struck her across the face. She covered her mouth with both trembling hands, her eyes wide with unadulterated, soul-crushing horror. She finally realized the daughter she had treated like dirt had been holding the master key the entire time. "And that $5 million loan you and Dad enthusiastically co-signed to save DeAndre from the cartel?" I continued, my gaze shifting coldly between my mother and my father. "Since the collateral you offered was completely fraudulent, the loan is in immediate default. The commercial lender will hold you personally liable for every single penny of that $5 million. You willingly tied your personal banking accounts, your retirement funds, and your remaining real estate assets to a violent criminal enterprise. The cartel enforcers currently standing at the back of this room want their laundered cut. The commercial lenders want their principal back. And the Internal Revenue Service has already seized your remaining liquidity." I paused, letting the absolute finality of my words sink deep into their bones. I wanted them to feel the exact same helplessness I had felt my entire life. "You are completely, hopelessly bankrupt. You have absolutely nothing left." Desmond dropped to his knees. The powerful, overbearing patriarch of the Wilson family literally crumbled onto the polished floor of the Four Seasons ballroom. He buried his face in his large hands, letting out a hollow, defeated groan that echoed painfully around the room. He had sacrificed his own mother, alienated his daughter, and committed federal felonies, all to protect a lifestyle that evaporated in a matter of minutes. A few feet away, Chloe was completely inconsolable. She was rocking back and forth on the stage steps, pulling at her ruined designer hair, wailing about her frozen bank accounts and her destroyed online reputation. She was entirely oblivious to the very real, very physical danger closing in on her husband. DeAndre was hyperventilating. His eyes were completely wild, darting frantically toward the service exits, calculating any possible escape route. But the three cartel enforcers had already closed the distance. They were standing mere yards away, their hands resting ominously inside their dark tailored jackets, cutting off his only path to the kitchen corridors. DeAndre realized he was not just facing prison time. He was facing a brutal, violent end. The wealthy guests of the mayor's gala were entirely paralyzed. The air in the grand ballroom was thick with a terrifying, suffocating tension. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. They were all simply watching the utter annihilation of Atlanta's most prominent family. The silence was stretched so tight, it felt like a physical wire ready to snap. Then, the heavy brass handles of the main ballroom doors turned. The massive double doors swung open violently, crashing hard against the ornate walls with a deafening boom. Dozens of federal agents in tactical gear flooded the room. "Federal agents, stay exactly where you are!" A voice roared through a heavy tactical bullhorn, vibrating against the crystal chandeliers and shattering the last remaining illusion of high society elegance. The elite crowd of Atlanta erupted into absolute, unadulterated terror. The wealthy socialites and powerful businessmen who had spent the entire evening sipping premium champagne and discussing corporate mergers were instantly reduced to a panicking, shoving mob. Women screamed, their designer heels slipping on the polished marble floor as they scrambled to get away from the main stage. Men in custom-tailored tuxedos threw their hands into the air, frantically pressing their backs against the silk-lined walls to prove they were not a threat. The tactical squad moved with terrifying, practiced precision. They were a sea of dark Kevlar, heavy combat boots, and drawn weapons, cutting through the glittering ballroom like a scythe. They bypassed the terrified politicians. They ignored the screaming influencers. They locked their sights entirely on the stage. DeAndre realized he was the primary target. The smug, arrogant facade of the brilliant financial guru completely disintegrated, leaving behind a sweating, desperate, cornered animal. He spun around, his eyes wild with panic, looking for a way out. He took one step toward the heavy velvet curtains masking the service exit, but two heavily armored federal agents were already there. They did not hesitate. They lunged forward, grabbing DeAndre by the lapels of his expensive, bespoke velvet jacket. DeAndre let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp as the agents lifted him entirely off his feet. They spun him around violently, utilizing his own momentum, and slammed him face first into the nearest banquet table. The impact was deafening. Crystal champagne flutes shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. Silver platters of expensive caviar crashed to the floor. DeAndre's cheek was pressed hard against the ruined white tablecloth, his breathing ragged and shallow as an agent firmly planted a heavy tactical boot between his shoulder blades to keep him pinned. "DeAndre Marcus Blackwood," the lead agent barked, his voice devoid of any human empathy. "You are under arrest for federal money laundering, wire fraud, and violating the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The heavy, unforgiving sound of steel handcuffs clicking shut around DeAndre's wrists echoed sharply over the ambient panic in the room. Across the ballroom, the three cartel enforcers who had been hunting him tried to quietly slip out the back corridors, blending into the frantic crowd. But a secondary squad of federal marshals had already secured the perimeter. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the cartel men were swiftly tackled to the carpeted floor and neutralized before they could even reach for their concealed weapons. Chloe witnessed her husband get brutally pinned to a table. Her entire world, the empire of lies she had carefully curated for millions of online followers, was physically collapsing right in front of her eyes. She completely lost her grip on reality. "Get your hands off him!" Chloe shrieked, her voice tearing through her throat in an ugly, primal scream. "Do you have any idea who we are? We are prominent citizens. You cannot treat us like common street thugs. Let him go right now." She lunged forward, her heavy, torn emerald silk gown dragging behind her like a ruined parachute. She raised her perfectly manicured hands, attempting to physically claw at the Kevlar vest of the agent holding her husband down. She did not even make it 2 steps. A female federal agent stepped smoothly into her path, grabbing Chloe's flailing wrists with a vice-like grip. The agent twisted Chloe's arms firmly behind her back, forcing her to bend forward to relieve the intense pressure on her shoulders. "No, let me go!" Chloe wailed, kicking her designer heels frantically against the agent's shins. "You are making a huge mistake. I am an influencer. I have lawyers. You cannot arrest me. I am pregnant. I am pregnant. You are hurting my baby." It was a pathetic, improvised, and utterly desperate lie. It was a calculated attempt to use biology as a human shield against a federal indictment. She was perfectly willing to leverage a non-existent child to save her own skin. The female agent did not even blink, clearly immune to the hysterical manipulations of cornered white-collar criminals. The agent seamlessly kicked Chloe's legs apart, forcing her off balance, and snapped a pair of heavy steel cuffs over Chloe's glittering Cartier bracelets. Desmond was watching his legacy burn to the ground. The powerful, imposing patriarch of the Wilson family, the man who had spent 3 decades ruling our household with an iron fist and demanding absolute perfection, was sweating through his tuxedo shirt. His authority had always been absolute, backed by his physical size and his relentless financial bullying. He truly believed his status made him untouchable. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to project dominance over the tactical squad swarming his family. "This is a gross violation of our civil rights," Desmond bellowed, stepping directly into the path of a senior federal investigator. "I am Desmond Wilson. I own one of the largest logistics firms in this state. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this circus immediately. I will have your badges for this illegal harassment." The senior investigator did not break his stride. He did not look intimidated. He looked at my father with the tired, clinical annoyance of a man who dealt with arrogant, fraudulent executives every single day of his life. The investigator pulled a heavily folded, officially stamped warrant from the front pocket of his tactical vest and held it up directly in front of my father's face. "Desmond Wilson," the investigator stated, his tone flat and relentless. "I am the supervisor, and I am placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, federal wire fraud, and the intentional falsification of commercial loan documents." Desmond's jaw fell open. The aggressive, booming bluster drained out of him in a single, devastating heartbeat. He looked at the federal warrant, seeing his own name printed in stark black ink next to a list of severe felony charges. He realized that his desperate 11th-hour attempt to leverage his own mother's estate had been the exact trigger that authorized his arrest. He had handed the federal government the murder weapon on a silver platter. The investigator did not wait for my father to process the reality of his doom. He grabbed Desmond's thick arms, forcing them roughly behind his back. Desmond did not fight. The fight was completely gone. He let out a low, pathetic wheeze as the cold steel handcuffs locked tightly around his wrists. The great patriarch was instantly reduced to a trembling, compliant suspect, humiliated in front of the very high society peers he had sacrificed his own daughter to impress. On the floor below the stage, Valerie witnessed her husband and her 2 golden children get shackled like dangerous fugitives. The pristine, flawlessly poised matriarch finally shattered. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the spilled champagne and shattered glass covering the ballroom floor. Her expensive couture gown soaked up the dirty liquid like a sponge. A panicked city councilman, blindly running for the nearest exit, stepped squarely on Valerie's prized, limited edition Hermes handbag. The heavy heel crushed the expensive leather, leaving a dirty, scuffed footprint right across the iconic logo. Valerie did not even notice. Stripped of her dignity, stripped of her stolen wealth, and entirely stripped of her illusions, she was left with absolutely nothing. She turned her frantic, tear-streaked face toward me. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a terror so profound it bordered on madness. She looked at me standing calmly on the stage, the only member of the Wilson family not in handcuffs, the sole trustee of the legacy she had tried to steal. Valerie began to crawl. The woman who had spent my entire life criticizing my posture, my clothes, and my career choices was literally dragging herself across the dirty, glass-covered floor. She crawled toward the stage steps, her hands trembling violently as she reached out toward the hem of my crimson trousers. "Zariah," Valerie sobbed, her voice a guttural, agonizing whine that cut through the noise of the federal raid. "Zariah, my baby, please." I looked down at her. Her makeup was running in thick, dark streaks down her cheeks. The elaborate updo she had spent 3 hours perfecting at the salon was falling apart, hanging in damp, pathetic strands around her face. She grabbed the fabric of my trousers, her knuckles white, her tears staining the crimson material. "You work for them," Valerie begged, pointing a shaking finger at the federal agents securing Desmond. "You are a forensic accountant. You know these people. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them it is a massive misunderstanding. We did not know what DeAndre was doing. We are innocent. Pay off the loan with the house. You have the trust fund. You have the estate. You can write a check right now and make all of this go away. You can fix this. You cannot let your parents go to jail. We are your family. We are blood." She was weaponizing the very concept of family she had denied me my entire life. She was using the word blood as a manipulation tactic, desperately hoping that the daughter she had treated like a defective servant still harbored some pathetic, lingering desire for her maternal approval. She wanted me to save her from the consequences of her own boundless greed. I stood perfectly still. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had watched her husband tear me down, the woman who had smiled while my sister stole my achievements. I searched my own heart, looking for a shred of empathy, a flicker of daughterly duty, or a single drop of pity. I found absolutely nothing. The emotional well was entirely dry. I reached down and calmly, firmly peeled her trembling fingers off my trousers. I let her hands drop back onto the cold, wet marble floor. "You told me I was an embarrassment, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously soft, yet carrying the cutting weight of absolute finality. I looked directly into her terrified, weeping eyes. "You stood in the middle of our kitchen just a few weeks ago. You looked me up and down, and you told me I was a failure who did not belong in this family. You told me I was a disappointment who would never measure up to Chloe." Valerie shook her head frantically, trying to deny the memory, trying to speak, but I did not let her. I stepped back, severing the physical connection completely. "You were right," I stated, my tone devoid of any emotion. "I do not belong in this family. And I certainly do not belong with criminals." "Zaria!" Valerie screamed. It was a horrific, echoing sound of pure, unadulterated despair. It was the sound of a woman realizing she was going to die in a federal prison. "Zaria, do not walk away from me." I turned my back. I did not look over my shoulder as the federal agents forcefully hauled my weeping mother to her feet, slapping the cuffs onto her wrists. I did not watch as my father, my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law were roughly marched out of the Four Seasons ballroom. They were paraded in a humiliating single-file line past the staring, whispering elite of Atlanta, their faces captured by the flashing cameras of the local news crews who had gathered outside the hotel. The untouchable Wilson Empire was being marched straight into the back of armored federal transport vans. I walked steadily through the parted crowd. The wealthy socialites who had ignored me all evening now stared at me with a mixture of profound awe and absolute terror. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Grand Hotel lobby and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The chaotic flashing of the red and blue police lights illuminated the dark street, casting long, dancing shadows against the buildings. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, clean night air. For the first time in 30 years, I felt completely, undeniably free. That crisp night air outside the Four Seasons was the exact moment my life truly began. The wailing sirens faded into the distance, carrying the toxic remnants of my past with them. 6 months later, the chaotic red and blue flashes of that night had been replaced by the warm, golden glow of a perfect Atlanta Sunday morning. I sat on the sprawling, freshly painted wraparound porch of the Sweet Auburn historic home, a frosty glass of sweet tea resting in my hand. The estate was completely transformed. The rotting wood and peeling paint my father had conveniently ignored for years were gone. In their place stood a magnificent, fully restored architectural masterpiece, a physical testament to the enduring strength of the women in my family. Sitting in the rocking chair beside me was Nana Pearl. She did not look like the frail, confused woman my family had tried to paint her as. She looked radiant. The color had returned to her cheeks. Her eyes were sharp and clear, and she wore a vibrant floral dress that matched the blooming azaleas lining the driveway. The heavy, oppressive weight of my father's greedy expectations had been lifted off her shoulders, adding years back to her life. We sat in comfortable Victoria silence, listening to the gentle rustle of the ancient oak trees. The crunch of gravel interrupted the quiet morning. A sleek, black government-issued SUV pulled through the wrought iron gates and parked near the restored fountain. Director Reynolds stepped out, dressed in his usual sharp Sunday casual attire, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He had been my commanding officer at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division for 5 years, but today he was dropping by as a guest. I stood up, greeting him with a warm smile as he climbed the porch steps. He kissed Nana Pearl politely on the cheek, accepted a glass of sweet tea, and settled into the wicker chair opposite us. He did not waste time with small talk. He knew exactly what we wanted to hear. "The final sentencing came down yesterday evening," Reynolds announced, taking a slow sip of his tea. The judge did not grant any leniency. DeAndre got exactly 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. The cartel connections heavily aggravated the money laundering charges. He will be spending the next decade and a half in a maximum security facility, far away from any bespoke velvet suits or luxury galas. I nodded, feeling a profound sense of closure. "And my father?" I asked, my voice completely steady. Reynolds set his glass down. "Desmond received 5 years for the commercial bank fraud and the forged deed. The judge made an example out of him. The logistics company was completely liquidated to pay back the commercial lenders and the remaining defrauded investors. He has absolutely zero assets left. He will be serving his time in a medium security facility in Florida." The great Desmond Wilson, the man who had demanded total obedience and projected an image of invincible wealth, was now just another federal inmate with a designated number. I looked over at Nana Pearl. She did not look sad. She simply took a sip of her tea, her expression serene and unbothered. "Actions have consequences," she stated simply. "But the real poetic justice," Reynolds continued, a slight smirk playing on his lips, "belongs to your mother and your sister." Valerie and Chloe were not indicted, but they might as well have been. The federal seizure of all assets meant they were instantly evicted from the Buckhead mansion. Their bank accounts were frozen, their luxury cars were repossessed, and their entire social circle immediately blacklisted them. Valerie tried to leverage her old country club connections, but security physically escorted her off the premises. She is currently bouncing between cheap motels, completely stripped of the high society dignity she valued more than her own flesh and blood. "And Chloe?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "Chloe's drop-shipping empire collapsed the second the federal import documents went public," Reynolds explained. "Her 2 million followers vanished overnight. The international lawsuits drained whatever hidden cash she had left. She is currently living in a tiny, subsidized one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. To make rent, Atlanta's favorite luxury beauty influencer is now working a minimum wage retail job at a discount cosmetics store in a strip mall. She spends 8 hours a day standing on her feet, wearing a cheap polyester uniform, dealing with angry customers demanding refunds. There are no ring lights. There are no photo filters. There is just the harsh, fluorescent reality of the working-class life she used to openly mock. The picture painted by Reynolds was flawless. The financial execution had been absolute. I had surgically removed the cancer from my life and protected the only family member who had ever shown me genuine love. Reynolds unclasped his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder featuring the golden seal of the Department of the Treasury. He leaned forward and handed it directly to me. "I did not come here just to deliver the court gossip, Zariah," Reynolds said, his tone shifting back to strict professional authority. "Your execution of the Wilson takedown was a masterclass in forensic accounting. You tracked shell companies and offshore cartel accounts that our senior agents had been chasing blindly for months. You kept your composure under unimaginable personal pressure. The higher-ups in Washington took notice." I opened the folder. Inside was a stack of official federal documents, heavily stamped and signed by the agency directors. The top page was a formal letter of appointment. "You are no longer just a senior forensic auditor," Reynolds stated, pride evident in his eyes. "As of tomorrow morning, you are officially the new chief of the Financial Crimes Unit for the Southeastern District. You have your own team, your own operational budget, and total autonomy over regional investigations. It is a massive promotion, Zariah, and you earned every single bit of it." I stared at the bold print bearing my name and my new, formidable title. For years, my family had tried to convince me that I was a secondary character in their grand, glamorous play. They had relegated me to the shadows, demanding I do the heavy lifting while they stole the credit and the cash. Now, I was holding the highest investigative authority in the region. I closed the folder and looked up at Reynolds. "I accept," I said firmly. "I will see you in the office bright and early tomorrow, Director." Reynolds smiled, finished the last of his sweet tea, and bid us a warm goodbye. We watched him walk back to his sleek vehicle, the tires crunching softly against the gravel as he drove out through the iron gates. The morning quiet returned, wrapping around the porch like a protective blanket. I set the heavy federal folder down on the small wooden table next to my rocking chair. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, resting my hands on the sturdy, freshly painted white railing. I looked out over the sprawling, manicured lawn of the sweet Auburn estate, watching the sunlight catch the vibrant green leaves of the ancient oak trees. This house was not just property. It was not just a line item on a balance sheet to be leveraged and traded by greedy men in cheap suits. It was history. It was blood, sweat, and genuine generational wealth built on truth, not fraud. It was a fortress that had survived decades of turmoil, and now it would stand for centuries more. I felt a soft, warm hand gently cover mine. Nana Pearl had stood up from her rocking chair and walked over to join me at the railing. She looked out at the exact same view, her eyes reflecting decades of profound wisdom and unshakable resilience. We stood there together, the only two remaining pillars of the true Wilson legacy. "You protected our legacy, child," Nana Pearl said, her voice soft but resonating with absolute, unbreakable strength. "You took the poison out by the roots." I turned my head and looked at my grandmother. I thought about the terrified, invisible girl I used to be, the daughter who had constantly sought the approval of a mother who despised her and a father who used her. That girl was gone, buried under the ashes of the fake empire I had personally burned to the ground. I smiled, looking out at the waking city of Atlanta stretching out beyond our iron gates. The long, agonizing war was finally over. The scapegoat had become the queen,